Thank you for coming. I'm Drew, and I recently graduated from Bucks Learning Cooperative in Langhorne. For my senior project, I researched the history of the Middletown Friends Cemetery. I'm honored to present this research to you today. So, how did this start? I've been spending a lot of time in the graveyard since I started at my school, BLC, in 2020. I would go there to read, study, and find some quiet. The more I visited, the more I noticed the little details, the trees with vines wrapped around it, the graves that were covered up, and most importantly, the names on those headstones. Over time, the graveyard became a safe space for me, and I developed a greater appreciation for the people whose space I was sharing. When it came time to choose a senior project, I knew instantly that I wanted to focus on this graveyard. I wanted to give back to the space that had given so much to me and leave it better than I found it. So my goal. The ultimate goal of this project was to aid in the restoration and documentation of not only the gravestones, but also the people buried beneath them. So how was I going to accomplish this? Using Find a Grave. One way to achieve this is by using the Find a Grave platform. Find a Grave is a free online database of cemetery records populated by volunteers, genealogists, and cemetery associations. Families can upload materials about the deceased, such as photos and life stories, or volunteers can collect resources from public networks like Ancestry.com, online obituary records, and historical societies. Entries on Find a Grave may contain a photo of headstones and information about the deceased and their family members. Find a Grave is an extremely useful asset for relatives, providing documentation for families and aiding those who do not live locally in finding information about their ancestors. I invite you all to check this platform out after you watch the video. So the different sections of the graveyard. The graveyard as a whole has about 1,400 marked graves and approximately 380 lot owners. While it may not be clear just by walking the grounds, the graveyard is separated into 8 sections: the field, the wall rows, and sections M, N, S, E, W, and NT. Today, I will cover the primarily historic sections, as the active sections didn't have enough data for me to collect. Each section is marked by a specific time period, characteristics, and sometimes even causes of death. So the field. The field by the wall of trees towards the front of the graveyard was the first official space designated for burials. Some burials did occur in other parts of the property, but primarily occurred in this section. The graves in this section are also largely unmarked. Up until the mid-19th century, Quakers were against marking burials because, as stated in the Disciplines of the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, quote, they were considered marks of superfluity and excess, and inconsistent with the plainness of our principles and practice. There are some records detailing burials in this section, but many are missing information or have been lost over time. It is estimated that there are about 450 burials in this section, although the number is not certain. Despite the general absence of marked graves, there are a few outliers, particularly the Jenks family. 5 members of the Jenks family have marked graves dating from 1818 to 1825, which is 25 years before marked burials became standard here. Interestingly, some of their graves are quite spread apart from each other as well. The wall rows. The mid-19th century marks the beginning of Quakers adopting more modern practices, most notably allowing marriages outside the Quaker faith and marking burials. The space by the wall and entrance to the graveyard was chosen as the first area for marked burials, although the reason for this choice is not known. The headstones in this section vary in shape, size, and material, but are generally short, rounded graves made from sandstone and limestone. There's an average of 50 graves per row, although that number steadily decreases as other parts of the graveyard were open for use. These rows mostly consist of people from a limited number of families, so it is common to see the same last name on many tombstones. Sections M, N, and S. This is by far the largest part of the graveyard. During this time, the congregation was growing steadily and needed room for more graves. They decided to open up 3 sections in the middle of the graveyard, each separated by its own path. Section M and S were created around the same time, and burials here overlapped with those in the wall rows, offering more plot options. Section N opened in the 1880s, but its primary use didn't begin until the 1910s. As the graveyard started filling up, the distinctions between these sections blurred. It is also important to note that these sections were the first to use granite markers, which were proven to be harder and more durable than their marble and limestone predecessors. Burials in these sections stopped in 1970 because no more plots were available. Section E. Section E is the most modern of the historic sections and the first to be created in the 20th century. There's a much greater variation in the appearance of the headstones, like shape, size, and even some decorative elements, as well as the surnames. By this point, the graveyard was open to members of the general Langhorne community, so people from other congregations were buried here as well. This section marks a complete transition away from limestone and marble to primarily granite headstones. While a few burials still occur here occasionally, this section is almost completely occupied. So the documentation process. Since this was quite a large project, I knew I would need a way to stay organized. I used a burial record chart made by Jim Newell to accomplish this. The chart is separated into various sections, including names, dates of birth and death, dates of burial, and plot information. These sections were incredibly valuable because the information provided was generally enough for me to research people within Ancestry.com. I also used a color coordinating system to help me keep track of what I needed to still do. Green indicated that the person was completely documented in Find a Grave, with all available information and a photo of their grave. Yellow meant that they were mostly documented and I just had to add a photo of the grave. Light red meant that they did not currently have a profile on Find a Grave, and dark red meant that there were either no headstone or not enough information to create a profile. Finding specific plots and stones to photograph was one of the most important parts of the documentation process. To do this, I looked at the person's name, family, and specific plot number. Then I consulted the map of the graveyard that Jim provided, which is separated by plot. I searched for the stone using a few memorized stones and their locations as markers. Once I located the specific plot, I determined if I was looking at the right stone. The easiest way was by clearly reading the names and dates of birth and death. However, with older graves, this was often not possible. In those cases, I looked for any letters or numbers on the stone and then narrowed down the possibilities by matching them to information for everyone buried in the plot. After finding the stone, I took a photo of it, noted its location, and uploaded it to Find a Grave. Through my research, I've learned so much about Langhorne, the people inhabiting it, and some interesting facts and statistics. So here are some interesting facts and statistics I learned about the graveyard. First, what is the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery? While both are used for the burial of people, a graveyard is usually smaller and affiliated with a specific church, whereas a cemetery is larger and open to people of all communities. So the burial ground we have here is indeed a graveyard. However, its official name is Middletown Friends Cemetery. Therefore, when referring to either Middletown Friends Graveyard or Middletown Friends Cemetery, you are technically correct. So most common surnames. While studying Langhorne history, I noticed several notable family names recurring in my general studies, street names, and banners around town. I was curious about how many people from each family are buried in the marked part of the graveyard. Here are my findings. Number one, we have the Paxsons with 45 people. The Paxsons are buried throughout the graveyard, with most in the wall rows. Hibbs with 40 people. They're mostly found in sections M and S. Tomlinsons with 38, and they're evenly distributed throughout the graveyard. Mitchells with 37, and they're buried in all sections except for N. Wildmans with 36, which are primarily buried in the wall rows, and Mathers with 34, and they're primarily buried in sections E and M. Additionally, there are a few more families with a significant number of burials. The Watsons was 31 people, Newbold was 25, Gillums was 24, and Satterthwaite's was 22. Most common first names. I also decided to track the most common first names in the graveyard. I found that the most common names are typically biblical in nature, which makes sense considering the strong religious involvement of these individuals. The top names for women are Mary with 101, Elizabeth with 90, and Anna with 78, although interestingly, there are actually only 7 Anns. Some honorable mentions include Sarah with 54 and Hannah with 23. For men, the top names are William with 91, John with 71, and Joseph with 50. There are also 41 Edwards as well as 33 Georges. Tracking the leading causes of deaths for residents of the graveyard is challenging, but here are the top 3. Number 1, we have blood disorders. The most common form I've found is various inherited blood clotting disorders, often resulting in cerebral hemorrhages. However, many cases of cerebral hemorrhages in the graveyard also stem from head trauma. Blood disorders also manifest as heart and liver failure. Typhoid fever at number 2. According to the World Health Organization, typhoid is, quote, a life-threatening infection caused by the bacterium Salmonella typhi that is usually spread through contaminated food or water, end quote. It causes prolonged high fever, fatigue, headache, nausea, abdominal pain, and constipation or diarrhea. Until the earliest 20th century, water filtration and contamination laws were minimal or non-existent. Well water was often compromised, especially when wells were placed near septic tanks. A leak in the septic tank contaminates the water. This issue primarily affected single-family residents, but sometimes impacted the greater Langhorne community as well. In the late 19th century, there were 4 pumps in Langhorne Borough where residents sourced their water. In 1888, a septic leak into one of these wells supplying the pumps led to a mass outbreak of typhoid that year. The situation was worsened by a concurrent typhoid outbreak in Philadelphia. And then number 3, we have tuberculosis. TB is an infectious disease that primarily affects the lungs and is caused by bacteria. It spreads through the air when infected people cough, sneeze, or spit. TB has 3 stages, with symptoms worsening as the disease progresses. Many people could live for years with the infection until it became fatal. TB was rampant in Philadelphia in the 1910s, affecting the Langhorne community as well. While the outbreak in Langhorne was relatively short-lived, it did leave a significant impact. So now we have burials. While the current average number of burials in the graveyard is about 3 to 4 per year, this wasn't always the case. In the late 19th to early 20th century, the average was around 11 burials per year. Over the 150-year span from 1870 to 2020, the average number of burials is about 8 per year. The highest numbers were in 1897 and 1916, with 20 burials those year, partly due to tuberculosis, and in 1888, partly due to typhoid, with 16 burials that year. The fewest burials occurred in 1962 and 2018, with just 1 each year, and of course, 0 in 2020. The strangest graves I've found. Most of the graves in the older section are very uniform. Many Quaker meeting houses in the area use the same grave manufacturer, producing short marble graves with rounded tops, and the inscriptions were quite plain, usually just the name, birth date, and date of death with 2 font options. While these are the norm, there are some outliers. Here are my favorite. The brick. This grave appears to be a short clay rectangle or brick with the inscription R. Beatty on top and the year 1848 on the side. This is unusual for several reasons. One is that burials weren't generally marked here until about a decade later. It is also in an unusual area, extremely close to the meeting house, where no other graves would have been placed during that time period. We have the New England style grave. This thin grave has lost all of its information over time. It stands out because of its decorative elements, which is odd given that Quakers of that era favored plainer designs. Challenges I've run into. In the previous slides, I discussed the numerous discoveries I was able to find. Now I will talk more about the challenging aspects of this work. In the early years, documentation was often not done rigorously or at all, leading to significant information gaps. I frequently encounter this issue when researching on Ancestry.com. Sometimes records are missing or were never created, causing me to hit brick walls and finding information about people simply because that information doesn't exist. Additionally, previously documented records, such as obituaries, sometimes go missing because websites clear out their archives or shut down completely. Another problem is the lack of first-hand records and objects. Illnesses wiping out entire familial lines often result in the loss of photographs and possessions. These items might end up scattered among distant relatives, thrown out, or given to antique stores, stripping away key information about these people's lives and appearances. One of the main problems I faced was the condition of many of the older markers. Due to dirt buildup and ground shifting over time, many gravestones are no longer visible on the surface or are barely peeking through. This presents a documentation challenge since there is no stone for me to document. It also cost me a lot of time searching meticulously for a stone that effectively does not exist. Grave erosion is another significant issue. Many old graves are made of marble, sandstone, or limestone, which are all susceptible to water erosion. Over a long period of time, this damage accumulates, making it hard or impossible to read many of the stones. I often have to rely on plot information, small details like initials or dates, and sometimes just process of elimination to identify the person buried there. Biological growth, such as lichens, moss, and mold, also obscures inscriptions and contributes to the degradation process. This problem is also worsened due to climate change. Climate change is significantly boosting the growth of plants like lichens, moss, and mold, which thrive in warmer climates. Shown here are photos of the same grave, taken only 16 years apart. It is important to note that this grave had stood for about 100 years with minimal damage. However, when even a small amount of biological growth latches onto the stone, it quickly consumes the entire surface, even beginning to break down the inner core of the stone. This emerging problem underscores the importance of persistent care of the headstones. Death certificates. Another problem I often face is with death certificates. When researching old graveyards, death certificates have about a 50-50 accuracy and efficacy rate. Sometimes they are very detailed, listing the primary cause of death, contributing factors, and even the exact date of death. Other times they are not. Due to a more limited understanding of health back then, people often misdiagnosed the deceased's condition, and sometimes they simply guessed. For example, the death certificate of Stephen Kirk Gillum from 1908 lists his cause of death as purpura hemorrhagica. However, it is impossible that this is his cause of death because this disease only occurs in horses. It was later determined that he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Thankfully, as time went on, death certificates became more accurate. However, it is still generally best to take them with a grain of salt. Restoration and cleanups. The restoration element of this project was incredibly important to me. Initially, it started small, with me doing quick sweeps around the graveyard, cleaning up bird droppings, clearing grass clippings after lawn mowing, wiping away dirt, picking off lichen, and making dandelion bouquets for the graves of the young people. Soon after, I realized I wanted to make a larger impact. I connected with Jim Newbold and began assisting with more significant tasks, such as caring for one of the large trees in the graveyard. The tree had not been blooming well because it was entangled in vines that were choking it. We cut down the vines and removed any offending branches, eventually hauling away large piles of debris. Now the tree is healthy and has been able to sprout beautifully. Additionally, I expressed my desire to clean some graves, and Jim graciously allowed me to clean some of his family graves. For one of my graduation presents, I requested and received grave cleaning supplies, which included D2 biological solution, natural bristle brushes, a plastic scraper, a sponge, a garden sprayer, and of course, water. I got to cleaning with the help of my dad shortly thereafter. Cleaning graves involves several steps. First, I wet the stone with water, then I apply the D2 biological solution with the garden sprayer and let that sit for 10 to 15 minutes. Using the natural bristle brushes, I gently scrub away any biological growth. The plastic scraper helps remove more stubborn lichen or moss. After scrubbing, I rinse the stone with water to wash away the loosened debris. It typically takes 1 week to a month for the solution to fully take effect, during which the stone continues to lighten and become cleaner. Connecting with the past. Through my research, I've learned a lot about fascinating people. Throughout the entire process, I prioritized focusing on individuals, their stories, and their connections to the broader community. By reading through obituaries, letters, and diaries, I discovered who these individuals were and how they lived their lives. I uncovered everything from headline news articles detailing major breakthroughs to diary entries describing the mundanities of everyday life. This information has been extremely valuable to me because I now feel a connection not only to the space, but to the individual people there as well. Relating these people's experiences to my own life has helped me realize that even though time has passed, some things always stay the same. Connecting with my communities now. Working on this project has helped me connect with my community in the present as well. Much of my research was made possible through the Historic Langhorne Association. Visiting here was a highlight of the process, and I was thrilled to share my passion for local history with others. Through this experience, I have gone to know many wonderful people whom I might not have known otherwise. Engaging with the Historic Langhorne Association not only provided valuable resources for my research, but also allowed me to build relationships within my community. These connections have enriched my understanding of both the past and the present, deepening my appreciation for the local history and the people who preserve it. So, final outcome. After a year of hard work, I'm thrilled to announce significant progress. We have now documented 57% of the graveyard, resulting in a total of about 1,260 memorials in the database. While I wasn't the only contributor to this Find a Grave project, many previous entries included only the basic information available on the headstones. I'm especially proud that a significant number of the memorials now provide a more complete picture of who these individuals were, going beyond the inscriptions on their gravestones. As I mentioned earlier, the grounds are also in better shape, although there is still more work to be done. So, what happens now? Although I have completed my senior project, this doesn't mean my involvement ends here. This project wasn't just about documenting the past and improving the graveyard's condition temporarily. It's about ensuring its preservation for future generations. I hope that with your support, we can restore and clean many more gravestones and bring the graveyard to a state where it can be appreciated and maintained for years to come. This work has instilled in me a deep sense of responsibility and connection to the community, and I'm committed to continuing these efforts to honor and preserve our local history. So, why does this matter? Why does this matter to me? And why should this matter to you? In general, preserving history is crucial for understanding how we arrived at our current state and how our communities have evolved. It provides us with a sense of identity, continuity, and context, helping us learn from past experiences and build a better future. This matters to all of you because there are individuals who are a part of your community and to some extent still are. They paved the way for the present, contributing to the foundation of your current lives and community. Preserving their legacies is essential for honoring those who came before us, including family, neighbors, and friends, ensuring their memories endure through time. Finally, why does this matter to me? Over time and through this work, the individuals in this graveyard have become an integral part of my high school experience and community. I will look back at this time and acknowledge that these were my peers as well. Having faced social hardships throughout my life, I understand what it's like to feel overlooked and forgotten. I want to ensure that others, even posthumously, do not experience that. I often think about how in the distant future, when my time comes, I would want someone to care for my grave. I believe this is a common sentiment. I feel the current graveyard residents shared this thought as well, and I take comfort in knowing that they can rest easy, knowing they are being cared for and remembered. I also realized through this that this project was not only about documenting history for relatives in the community, but also for myself. No matter where life takes me, I want to look back and visit the graveyard, even if only in photographs. What I hope you take away from this today is the importance of preserving our history and honoring those who came before us. It is a shared responsibility that connects us to our past, enriches our present, and guides our future. By working together, we can ensure that the legacies of these individuals are remembered and respected for generations to come. Thank you.